So here's the good news. 63% of CEOs in Silicon Valley surveyed added jobs last year, and the majority say that they will continue to add jobs this year. So we are finally at this point. We're in recovery, we are growing. But what makes this growth high stakes? Well, let's talk about the bad news. The number one issue that CEOs in Silicon Valley say is their number one problem is recruiting and retaining the best talent in order to grow their companies. And that means that very likely, for their recruiting efforts, they have their sights set on your most promising teammates. So you are going to be tested in this time for being able to create loyalty among your team in ways that you haven't been tested in years. But there's also a second reason that these are high stakes, and that is because of the opportunity. In a growth period like this, the waters are rising, all boats are being lifted. And it's not just enough to grow at this point. You have to be able to outperform and outmaneuver your competition to have a high-performance company that has a sustainable ability to grow and to continue to innovate. Another opportunity is that the leaderboard, the economic leaderboard of the world, has changed. China has billions of dollars. Chinese private equity funds have billions of dollars that they are looking to invest in high-quality companies, both inside and outside of their borders. So you have to see the world as a different place, as a different group of opportunities. And that's what makes this high growth. High growth and high stakes. So 5 things I'm going to cover today to help you lead for high stakes growth. First of all, hire and lead a spirited team. Secondly, expand cultural agility. Third, develop cultivated charisma. Fourth, avoid the success trap. And finally, fifth, execute for innovation. So let's talk about what it is, Silicon Valley. I had some conversations with your members in advance, and we were talking about what it is that it's important to share what, this Silicon Valley workforce, what it is that makes them so different. Now, first of all, it's a fairly evolved workforce. They have to understand the business model that they're working in. They have opinions about the leadership and management that are very strong. They have to be very deep in their area of technical expertise. But as Daniel, who I was speaking with, said, even engineers have to be able to make an elevator pitch for their company. They have to understand the value proposition to be able to bring it and the context that they're working to the table whenever they're working together. The other thing, too, is it's a very transient workforce. So that means that they are very well connected. They're very well networked with each other. They are in charge of their own careers. They're looking to create their own opportunities. And so they're not particularly loyal. They haven't been shown a lot of loyalty. They're opportunistic. And if the opportunity is where they currently are, they'll stay there. If the better opportunity is elsewhere, they'll leave. And so what you have is sort of a bidding war of perks that's going on in Silicon Valley. You have Intuit with their learning culture, and they're creating community inside of their company with bi-generational mentoring. Not just that the older, more senior people are mentoring the younger folks, but actually you've got millennials and Generation Y mentoring up. Well, maybe Generation Y, millennials might be a little young. but you've got EMC, who's very much about flexibility, whether it's about hours or working from home or tailoring the job to the individual. And of course, let's not forget Google's legendary cafeteria. But in speaking with people who work at Google, they say all the free gourmet food in the world would not make them stay if they had a problematic with boss. And so that's why it comes back to leadership. Because these perks at a certain point create a level playing field. They can only go so far. Everybody has these sort of community building mixers and things like that. It creates a level playing field, and really the difference is your leadership. So when we talk about hiring and leading a spirited team, this is how I define spirit. So I sort of break the potential of a company down, of the people, into sort of these 4 categories, but 2 of them are really about skills. Leadership and technical. These are skills that can be trained. These are skills that can be imbued in your organization. But then the thing is that you have these areas of spirit. And spirit really need to be hired. They need to be hired for, they need to be cultivated, they need to have free reign to develop as well. And that's a big area of your leadership. And these areas of spirit, teamwork obviously, and when I talk about teamwork, I'm not talking about everybody working together. I'm talking about teamwork, where as a group, you win or you lose together. You don't sort of opt in and out of things. This is what's inside of a person that makes them feel that way or not. And then this area of heart. I would love to find a more macho, businessy word for this, but I take it from this really putting your heart into it. You have people who really put their heart into it. They're passionate, not toxic passionate necessarily, but they really put their heart into things. And they take ownership of their job, and they really care about the company. They are innovative, and they are entrepreneurial within their organization. That's what I mean by heart. You have to hire for it, pretty much, but you also can kill it. And so you have to be careful about it. Now, of course, the potential of the organization can expand or contract with how well these are. And also, if you have a bunch of group that's just technical and it's low on teamwork, you can also move this bullseye off as a group, as an organization. So you really want to do your best to keep it in the center. But I wrote an article about this recently for Fast Company. And Fast Company, they changed the title to, should you hire for skills or spirit? So it was really put in this either or combination. The interesting thing was that there were tons of comments, and they were 99% hire for spirit. Hire for spirit. But what do we really do? We have a tendency to hire for skills. We hire for skills because it's a lot easier. You get a resume, you have a university, you have this work experience, you're able to say, okay, they can do these things. So you have to look at how you're hiring. How do you hire for spirit? How do you assess the spirit that you bring onto a team? And then, once you have that team, how do you unfold it? How do you let it grow? I was brought into a company by the board. They had just gotten rid of a very toxic CEO, and they asked me to go in, identify the person who should succeed him. So I found just the perfect person. And I worked with him to get him up to speed, and he had come from not as much of a senior position, but he was the right guy. And so we worked on it, and so he had such a collaborative style. And he had such a way of allowing the team to expand. This was a fairly abused team. The guy who was gone was very authoritarian and very abusive. But this team was able to really sort of unfold and bring their own creativity and their own inspiration. And as a result, the organization thrived. And so the ways to lead for spirit is not to rely on a position of authority, but to act like a grassroots leader. Grassroots. Within a corporation or within your business. Really from the bottom up. And so that the people have a sense of their own engagement and their own excitement, because you have this spirited group. Now, they'll show it more or less, but that is one of the ways that your organization can truly grow. So, the next thing is expanding your cultural agility. Now, I assume, I am talking to a room full of cultural agility rock stars. All right? So you are either living abroad or you're so engaged in foreign countries and foreign cultures that you're here at this event. And so, but the thing is, you can always expand. I lived in Germany for a number of years. I worked at Deutsche Telekom in the headquarters, and there I was working with teams in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in the Americas, really trying to coordinate all these different styles and everything like that. Now my family, we do our best to spend, live a month or so each year in China. I know that I can always expand my cultural agility. And so there are ways that we can expand, there are ways that we must expand, because people are getting more and more specialized. And also, the world is getting a bit more complex. And I see you taking pictures. You're more than welcome to, and anybody want to give me their card at the end, I will be happy to send you the deck. So, people are getting more specialized. And what we used to have was this idea of cultural savvy. You've heard of cultural savvy? That was all the rage when I was going to get my international business degree. And so it was, cultural savvy, you learn about another culture. So I'm going to the United States and I'm going to learn about the Americans, and I'm going to then be able to interact with the Americans because I'll be able to, sort of modify my behavior for them. And really what I'm talking about is cultural agility, because cultural savvy is not enough anymore. Because very likely, if you're leading a large team or a mid-sized team here in the Silicon Valley, you have Americans who, of course, have all sorts of different cultural backgrounds. But I'm going to bet that you also probably have Indians, Chinese, all sorts of Asians. You have all sorts of these different cultures. And so you can't always be adapting your work style so it's easier for you to work with them. What you can do is develop the skills so it's easier for them to work with you. That way you can lead a virtual team that spans 17 countries, 4 continents, and have everybody on a phone call. You can't be adapting your stuff necessarily all to them, but you can make it easier for them to work with you. And that it applies to both you as individuals, but this same thing applies to teams and organizations and companies as well. So these are the skills really at the heart of cultural agility. And I'll go through these very quickly, but I have 2 books on this, so there's plenty of resources out there to dig deeper, and we have a lot to cover. But I'll just go through them very quickly. First of all is awareness. That is, starts with self-awareness, understanding your own cultural biases. What makes you comfortable? What makes you uncomfortable? Do you know why? The other thing too, being attuned. Right? Being attuned to fine nuances. If you're going to be culturally agile, you are dealing with tremendous ambiguity. That means you could plunk down into a country you've never been before. You've got to be able, your sensors are very much up. In the same way that you're doing this in the US, or if you're in the US and you're visiting different countries, you're very attuned to what's going on. And you adapt. You do adapt your own behavior so that it's easier for people to work with you. But you do it in a way that's authentic. Because you're still about making this personal human connection between yourself and somebody else. It's not about aping another culture. I mean, we all know the people who speak, maybe they all of a sudden they're talking with a bunch of teenagers and they throw out this lingo and you're like, oh, no, don't do that, that's too much. Then also you do continue to acquire knowledge. This is the savvy piece. Of course you continue to acquire knowledge. It's a very important part. It's just not the whole game necessarily that it was before. And then you assess. You assess, how am I doing as an individual? Am I, I notice as I get older, I start to back off maybe a little bit and not be as out there, maybe be a little bit more comfortable. But so I have to be constantly assessing myself. Am I progressing? Am I regressing? You look at an organization. We've achieved a certain level, but have we had enough turnover in our people that we're changing a bit, we're not advancing? And so the way that this applies to organizations is it can be very, very dangerous. It applies to communication within the organization. It applies to marketing, obviously, and it applies also at the strategic level. Groupon is a phenomenal example of something that has gone very wrong. They were doing a Chinese market entry. And they were different. They weren't under the name Groupon. It was Taobao. But so they were over there, and then over here in the States at the same time, they ran a Super Bowl ad. Super Bowl, you've got to be edgy, you've got to be out there. They ran a Super Bowl ad that they used Tibet as a punchline. I don't know if they were thinking that they weren't going to be communicating, they somehow would be a different company and they wouldn't be recognized. The Chinese microblogs lit up immediately with this. Because people are smart and they're very connected. And you don't spend millions of dollars entering a market and then insult your market in another country. And the thing was that the organization didn't have the cultural agility to either have somebody stand up and say, stop, don't do this, or if someone did that, there wasn't a person at the most senior enough level to actually stop it. It happened. And so the benefits, though, of being able to expand with cultural agility is, again, I go to these Chinese private equity, the ones who are successful. The Chinese have billions of dollars to invest right now. Billions of dollars. They're ready to go. They have a mandate. And so they don't have the experience, though, or they have very little experience in this outbound private equity. So it's going to be the companies who are easy for them to work with, who are going to be successful, and who are going to be able to grow as a result of building these alliances and these long-term relationships. So the opportunities are huge, and the pitfalls are also enormous of not always developing this cultural agility. You'd think it would be happening, but we keep seeing mistake after mistake. I just wrote a blog post about pop chips this week. All right. So the next step is charisma. Question is, do you have to be born with it? Steve Jobs could stand up in front of an audience and he would light them on fire. They would be cheering. They loved him. They would be on their feet. Mark Zuckerberg has a different reaction that he gets maybe out of people. So the thing is that, do you have to be born with it? There's sort of this myth that you do. But I believe you can cultivate it. Now, cultivated charisma is finding this intersection of money and meaning. So the people who work for you, they work for you for an exchange of money for their time and their labor and their smarts. But the thing is, the thing that creates loyalty, the thing that is compelling, the thing that creates charisma is meaning, that they get a sense of fulfillment, that it's important to them what they do. And the reason why I particularly brought up Facebook is to illustrate the point that you don't have to tell them what the meaning is. You don't have to show them what the meaning is. The meaning is a reflection of them. Facebook in August of this year is projected to have 1 billion users. To put that into context, that is more than the population of both North and South America combined, and is nearly 50% more than the population of Europe on Facebook. Now, Facebook doesn't create a lot of content. We create the content. Whether you like it or participate or don't, we create the content, the users on Facebook. People use it. They're there to tell their status update, to have a place to be heard, maybe once or twice a week or 14 times a day. And they also can get liked. There are comments, there are interactions. We recreate our own communities there. We reconnect. I'm good friends now with my preschool best friend who lives in Melbourne because of this thing, this platform, this ability to connect and to share information. We see each other's kids. We hear about what's important in each other's lives. So the meaning that we create is our own. It's a reflection of who we are. And so the thing is that if you also look at Steve Jobs, Apple, yeah, it's cool devices. I like a lot of them. But it's also talking about to that sense of identity. Who you want to be. Are you a stuffy PC, or are you, cutting edge, more Apple-y person? I mean, so meaning is about finding that intersection of money. Money has to be there, but also reflecting people's own aspirations. And that's how you can cultivate your own charisma. Mark Zuckerberg certainly has charisma. He certainly does. I've heard charisma coaches say, though, he should have a less nasally voice, and he should, move his head down to be more engaging. It's very tactical. But quite honestly, the charisma around him is this tremendous thing that he created that people associate with. All right. So if you've hired and you're leading this spirited team, you're developing cultural agility, and you have developed your own cultivated charisma, and you have a certain level of success. There is, of course, the success trap that you have to be careful of. So as we go along, we look at the economy. We look at this downturn that we've had. You get up at problem solving, you're going along okay, and then the economy happened, and now the economy is going to pick back up. It is picking up. And so then you continue on. Note that the continuing on is red. Or you're going along, you had the hit in the economy, you became more productive, you have better performance, all these different things, and then you're able to level up. And then you continue on. Also red. That's the success trap. It's this plateau. It's the plateau where, it doesn't have to be exactly flat, it could be a little bit up, but it's a certain amount of complacency, it's a certain amount of this has worked for us before, it's a certain amount of consistency, this is the best way to do it, and we're tired. We could use a little rest. Or you innovate, but you innovate in ways you already innovated. So the key to performance growth, Niels, that we were talking about, is to be able to shorten those plateaus. Yes, it happens. It's a natural thing to not always be on this huge upward trend. But to hit a plateau, to recognize the complacency, and then to move up again. Then to innovate and take it up a notch. But then also to shorten it. And so you're able to create this cycle again and again and again and speed the whole thing up. And so the way that you do that is through innovation. Now, I have nothing to tell you guys about innovation. Sweden is a very small country with a very big history of innovation, from dynamite to Tetra Paks to Skype, and let's not forget ABBA. So the thing is that innovation, however, is maybe a little different now, in that you have to have space to have creativity, right? You need a certain amount of being able to think. Sure, some things come out of pressure situations, necessity being the mother of invention, but you also have a certain amount of space to be able to create, which means you need a healthy organization, a thriving organization, an organization that is executing. Because if everyone's just running around putting out fires, you're not really necessarily having the space to create and to innovate. And innovation only happens when creativity is executed on, when it is realized. That's when it's an innovation. Before then, it's a good idea. And so, in any case, this is just an example of how I take my clients, my corporate clients or my large companies, and I take them through the strategy process up through innovation. And it's not rocket science necessarily, but it's building execution into the process. The execution is every single way along the process to realization, that accountability is there, that the team development and the people are considered as part of the strategy. So you're able to have it, that you don't create silos, you break down silos by having them to be able to communicate at this level. And so the key here really is about, are you executing? Execution is the key. All right, so I wanted to open it up and see what questions you may have. Yes?
You sometimes find that leadership and teamwork can clash.
All right. So the clash between teamwork and leadership.
Where you get a guy who's, let's say, a person. A person
Yes.
who's a natural leader
Mm-hmm.
and wants to exert his leadership and therefore turns off the team.
Right. Well, so there's this question about this natural leader or this natural in-charge person who's so directive that he or she turns off their team, shuts down their team. And so I would say that that is maybe, it's not the definition of leadership that I would use per se. I would say the definition of leadership is someone who doesn't necessarily take charge and say, follow me, but instead is able to foment and create, really instigate and support the leadership, the success of the team as a whole. So that they don't need the glory. They don't need everyone pointing at them in order to say, yes, you are the leader. But instead, what they're doing is they're creating the success of the team because that's what's more important than their own ego or whatever would be shutting people down. There are times when it works great. There are times when there are people, when there are leaders who, they tell people what to do, and it may shut people down. Their team, the people who would choose to work on their team are there, and the people who would not choose to work on their team are gone, and that's also legitimate.
Sometimes if the leader, in giving a command, will explain why. Okay, why, and in terms that are easily understandable and part of a whole bunch of metaphors.
Right.
It all makes it makes innovation prosper because now you have an idea. That may work, and here's how we can make it work better.
Right. And so that was about the directive coming along with the context of why it's important, why we want to go in this direction, and how that helps the team. And I think it's because it gives them that more of that sense of meaning. It gives them that sense of, this is the bigger picture that we're going for. And I think it's also important that when a leader sets forward and says, this is the vision, this is what we're going for, not only do they give the context, but they give sort of the results that they're looking for, and they measure against the results. And they let the people who are doing the work create their own processes that support the best of their abilities in order to get to the results, as opposed to, does it exactly the way that I would do it. But instead, you and I would work very differently. I would have one way of doing it, you have another. The important thing is the result. Yes?
So
Yes.
you brought up an example before, Groupon.
Yes.
What are they in the making, 4 years or something like that? $7 billion market value. The example you brought up here was that they didn't really have somebody raising their hand saying that's kind of stupid. One thing, it's a very interesting presentation and very good approach. What I don't see though here is like, how do you capture like the framework of it? Where is the infrastructure in this? In an example like Groupon, you have a massive explosion of something. And how do you align all those things into one and the only thing? How do you put the processes and the framework in place?
Okay, so let me see if I'm getting your question, because I'm not sure that I am. You're saying that there are so many moving parts. So there are so many moving parts to explosive growth. How do you create a single process to sort of put it all through?
There's got to be so many moving parts that in that kind of time frame, so it's almost impossible to overlook and oversee.
Right. How do you control growth? And
talking about high stakes growth. It's not like
no, it is high stakes.
Would be a good example, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's where I would say it's a lot in the capacity of the people, because you can't control growth. Right? If you're going to have a spirited group of people and you're going to really empower them and you're going to lead them in a way where they're able to bring themselves to full bear, you're not going to be hemming them in and controlling. What you can do, though, is to have these skills, to train them in these skills, to have some understanding, to really look at culture, your internal culture, your company culture, and say, okay, so what does this look like? How do we communicate with each other? What are our values? And so it sort of has to come from this intrinsic place. So you create something intrinsic, and you bring it to your people, but you can't hem them in. It has to be at the core of the organization, at the core of the people. Yeah? Great. Yes?
So if you would mention 3 things that differentiates how this is actually working in Silicon Valley, and this is also the cause for a lot of growth and successful companies, if you differ that from, for instance, the Nordic region, are kind of countries and how leadership is and how growth is managed.
Right. So we're talking about differentiation between how this is in Silicon Valley and how this is in the Nordic countries. And You are probably more of an expert
Three
in it than I am.
things,
So
I would say.
this is based on the interviews that I've done, because I have tremendous respect for the Nordic countries. I think that, like I said, you're very innovative and very progressive, and you see the community as a whole, and tremendous things that I respect. I think that there is this. It's in some ways in the round of leadership. Leadership as in, do you rely on the power of position, or do you stoke an intrinsic desire? Do you let these people, are you comfortable, can you become comfortable with, lighting the fire in people and then herding cats, right? Or putting these things into people and then really sort of letting them go? Or is it a matter of trying to control where things are headed? And I think that is my guess. And I would ask you if that sounds legitimate. Is that one of the differences that you would see?
Yeah, but both.
Both.
Yeah. No, but I would say it's, I think that when teams go too much outside of the system, they go rogue, basically.
Right.
And that's where innovation happens.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I mean, we have clear examples of that. For instance, Ericsson, which is a very well-known company, large one. One of the main reasons that Ericsson succeeded back in, is it maybe 60 years ago when, I mean, they're 130 years old, but
Right.
60 years ago when they really started to grow, is that they let go of a whole division because they were just too rogue, too much. They were innovating a lot of things that no one really wanted to touch. Ericsson, like the management or the company per se. And that's the Ericsson of today, that rogue team.
That
is the
rogue
one
team.
That built up the whole, so basically, and you can still see that in a lot of larger corporations that you
Right.
would, instead of invite that maybe, kind of let it go and then something happens.
Right.
But here maybe it's more open to do that, and you want to control the situation. Because, I mean, for instance, when Google innovates, they give 20% of the time for all employees is to come up with new things. 20%
Right.
of their, right? It's 20% of everyone's time is for innovations, to come up with their own things.
Yeah. And I think that, so you're saying that, that with Ericsson, there was a rogue team, and Ericsson said we wanted to cut them loose, but then that team created the innovation that created their success. And that Google, for example, creates 20% of their employees' times in order to be creative and to innovate. And I think that probably one of the differences also is the comfort with failure. That comfort with failure. Failure is a part of Silicon Valley. Failure, everyone, not everyone, but raise your hand if you worked at a failed startup. So we've been there. We've been there. We've been out there. We've risked. We've been entrepreneurial as individuals. We've failed. We picked up. We rebuilt. And so I think that there's that comfort with failure. Nobody likes it. Nobody says, "I'm going to fail today." Right? I'm going to build this company so it can burn in ashes. But we do say I'm willing to take a risk. Fail forward. Yeah. And Silicon Valley is very risk loving. So I would say that would be also. Yes?
The question, you're talking about the leadership level. In Nordic countries, it's more like you're a leader, you have consensus in the group, and then you make a decision. And in the States, it's more like you have to make a decision quickly, or you're not a really good leader, or you're not taking charge.
Right.
How do you balance this thing with the two different types of organizations?
Yes, and that's this. The question was around how do you balance more of a consensus-based culture with more of a directive culture? With this sort of driving, make a decision and move. So that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so the thing is that you do have to balance them, and I think that you do that around the culture of the company. And so I'm writing, through my work, I have the good fortune to collaborate with Marshall Goldsmith. And I don't know if you are familiar with him, but he has just been ranked as like the #1 leadership expert in the world. And so we're working on, currently on a paper on the cultural ceiling. And the cultural ceiling, is not about your personal nationality and the nationality of the company that you're working for, but it's really around this being a global executive, being a global manager. Do you have a mastery of English? Are you fluent in an executive vocabulary? Are you able to work well in other cultures, and are you able to sort of leave your own reference group behind? That could be your family or your religion or your nationality or your language, in order to be more accepting of other ones. You don't strip yourself of who you are, but you're very accepting of other cultures, and you are able to function in another culture very well, and to create this reference group, right, around the company that you're working in. And so I think the way to make it easy to work with each other is to say, this is how we're going to work together, and make that clear. Make that a clear part of the company. It's a question also within yourself. I work with people who are all over the world and from different countries, and some of them, when they come to the United States, they have a very collaborative leadership style, and they're in an American company that's like, we got to see you, just sometimes ready, fire, aim. And the person's like, no, it's not the way to do it. I want my team to have a say. Once we make a decision, I'll have plenty of resolve and we'll move forward. But I have seen these people be moved to the sidelines. So there's a certain amount also of what's the organizational framework that you're working in. And you have your own company, so you can create that. Yes?
What would you say is the one key characteristic of Steve Jobs that made him such a great leader at Apple?
Okay, the one key characteristic of Steve Jobs that made him such a great leader at Apple. And I would say failing forward. He was a lousy leader the first time around. He was a very problematic leader. He was a dictator. He was a very problematic leader. And he was a man who had plenty of nosebleeds. He was also absolutely visionary. He saw things that other people couldn't, and he could see what we wanted before we knew we wanted it. And so I think he had that huge conviction about his own vision. Now, if he was wrong, no one would know his name. He had that vision, he had the conviction, whoop, and he was right. So that, I think, is it. But it wasn't enough until he failed forward. It wasn't enough until he had to retool. Did we lose it? Okay, great. Okay, any other questions? All right, yes, thank you for your question. Just let me just finish up real quick. So, I have loved talking with you, and I hope you've gotten something out of it, but you will have wasted your time if you don't look at this and pick something that you really want to implement. What are you going to implement? Are you looking at your hiring? Are you looking at how you're managing a spirited team? Are you looking at your cultural agility, or maybe the cultural agility of your organization? Could they be more responsive? Could they be more powerful in how they do that? Do you want to up your own charisma? Do you think maybe you're seeing a success trap? It's not enough just to grow now. You have to go faster, more creatively, more sustainably to outmaneuver your competition. Or do you think maybe it's time to execute? Notch up the execution so that your company can innovate better. Pick something that you can implement. Make a choice. Figure out what you want to achieve. Make this time worthwhile so it can make a difference.
If you could
Yes.
name one company that executes all of these steps really well, give me a name.
IBM. IBM. IBM just celebrated being 100 years old. And they're a freak show. And freak being the very, very best meaning of the word. I mean, this is just just a small percent of the population. They have a huge workforce, but they have some of the best people in the world working for them, creating for them. They're investing in basic research. My husband also happens to be a physicist for them. So I know it pretty well. But IBM does a fantastic job of this.
But put yourself in their position.
Yes.
1978.
Mm-hmm.
They were in the big mainframe business.
Yep.
That was their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the vision to see that computing is going to come down to the personal level.
Mm-hmm.
And they created a team which is going to execute quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And they did.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people that were early in the PC marketplace
Right?
would sit there and poo-poo the PC when it was first announced. And I would say to them, don't underestimate the power of those three letters called IBM.
Yes. So you talked about IBM in the 70s moving from mainframes to PCs. I would say also in the 80s, IBM having 100 days of cash left. 100 days. And bringing on a guy who was cookie executive to turn them around. Also very, very innovative. And then also leaving their hardware behind to move into services.
That's right.
Right?
Cultural change.
Lots of cultural changes, and it's always around excellence and also about being an IBMer.
And
Continued.
continued change.
Yep.
Being open, seeing what's happening in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Don't insulate.
Yeah.
Don't insulate.
You can't insulate. Not in this world. You cannot insulate anymore. You cannot.
You couldn't do it 30 years ago, but nobody would see it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
And they executed very well.
Yes, they execute very well. Yes. Okay. Thank you.